Yes.
All right, I'll call the work session to order. And will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Allen.
Present.
Councilmember Hagenow. Councilmember Kerr. Here. Councilmember Martin.
Present.
Councilmember Parmet. Councilmember Sullivan. Mayor Riley.
Present.
There are 4 members present.
I want to extend Councilmember Sullivan's regrets not being able to attend today. He had an emergency family situation out of state he had to deal with. We found out about yesterday. So he will not be here today. He may attempt to call in for the council session tonight if he can orchestrate that. Is there anyone in the public who would like to make a comment before council on any topic that's in the work session agenda? Oh, I saw a town manager's showing up, probably in shorts and a Hawaiian shirt.
I know, I noticed he doesn't have his camera on.
I noticed that.
Aloha.
Yeah, and you got out of town before the snowstorm. All right. Is there anyone online who would like to make a comment?
Hi, yes, this is Christy Camp, living in Ski Tip. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Christy.
Beautiful. I noticed that you have a council planning and strategic planning on your agenda, and I'd like to just make a brief comment. Mayor and council members, thank you for the opportunity to speak. A nature first mission is not just environmental. It's a strategic economic choice. 2025 Colorado Resiliency Framework shows that protecting natural systems is one of the highest return on investment strategies available to reduce risk, stability, long-term costs, and strengthen community performance. Healthy forests, rivers, and open spaces lower wildfire severity, protect water supplies, and reduce the financial burden of emergency response and future infrastructure, meaning strong ecosystems reduce the town's long-term operating costs. Economic upside is equally clear. Communities that prioritize natural assets see higher property values, longer, stronger, year-round tourism, reduced capital expenses, and fewer costly disruptions. Nature-aligned planning also attracts investors, workforce talent, and entrepreneurs looking for communities that plan with foresight. A key piece of this strategy is establishing a connected wildlife reserve, a protected corridor, perhaps through and around town that links the surrounding national forest. Connected habitat reduces wildlife, vehicle collision, preserves ecological function, and maintains the natural character that drives economic demand. We also have real opportunity in the community engagement with to support this vision with local volunteer river restoration with the Blue River Watershed Group, forest and trail stewardship with Friends of Dillon Ranger District, and local energy and sustainability programs through the High Country Conservation Center. These partners and others build ownership, reduce cost, and mobilize residents in measurable ways and visitors. A Nature First mission isn't a cost, it's a strategic investment with long-term returns. I urge the council to make ecosystem health, connected wildlife corridors, and community engagement core pillars in our mission and vision so we can grow responsibly and strengthen our long-term economic positions. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? All right. With that, I'll declare the public comment period closed. And I'd like to introduce Sam Light from SURSA, who's going to do some council member training. The last time we saw Sam here, I think, for training was just before we incorporated for the council members who were, members who were on the ballot to be considered for council members. And welcome back, Sam.
Thank you. Thank you very much, council and staff. Great to be back. Thanks for welcoming me up. Good chance to get out of Denver for me. Come visit you all. So this is that opportunity to, again, we don't do it at every meeting and we don't think about it all the time, and that's a good thing. But risk, right, is a topic that we should set aside some time to think about every once in a while. So this is an opportunity to kind of flex that muscle a little bit. And we're going to do a little training around that issue for you all today. Maddie's going to help me run the slides, right? So why don't we go to the next slide? But before I dive into my presentation, just a little bit more about me and CIRSA. So we've got 2 new council members, fairly new, right? 3? I'm sorry, 3?
3, yes.
3. All right, congratulations. By way of background, CIRSA stands for the Colorado Intergovernmental Risk Sharing Agency, which is the town's insurance provider for property and casualty and workers' compensation coverage. So we provide the insurance for the property side, and for your personal property, vehicles, and then probably more interestingly, for public entities, we provide the liability coverage, everything from police liability coverage all the way up to public officials liability coverage. And I'll talk a little bit about what that means. But the one takeaway about CIRSA that I wanted to emphasize is we're not a commercial insurance company. We're a public entity self-insurance pool. So our only owners, our only members are Colorado cities and towns. That's our whole book of business. We're very proud of that. We insure only Colorado cities and towns and affiliated entities. So we insure about 90% of the cities and towns in the state of Colorado. We're owned and controlled by our members, and we ourselves are a kind of a quasi-public entity. And that influences our collective attitude around risk management, right? Because just as you as a council here locally are working to be good stewards and fiduciaries of Keystone's own interest in assets, we kind of aggregate that issue up, right? And our only interest at CIRSA are the interests of the member individually and the interest of the pool as a whole, right? And so, unlike commercial carriers, I think we share with our members a strong commitment to risk management, proactively thinking about risk, and for you as the governing body, resourcing the organization appropriately, right, around risk issues to help you not only manage risk, but succeed as a community. So that's a little bit about CIRSA. You can read more about CIRSA at our CIRSA at a Glance handout, which is one of the documents that I put at your places, as well as at our website. Okay, so let's dive in. My presentation is organized around suggestions for you all at the governing body level around risk issues. But it's not a lot of legalese. I'm happy to take questions if you want to dive in a little bit more. But given the time we have, I just want to run through a couple of the concepts. And but to make our time together as effective as possible, I'm going to try and set aside time for questions. So I think our time budget is I'm going to try and go for about 30 minutes or so. And then we'll set aside 15 minutes for questions. I would love to hear what's on your mind and how things have been in this first year or so in getting organized. I was looking at your ordinance and resolution list, and wow, you've been busy. You've been busy, and you're going to continue to be busy. But it's what a wonderful story to tell, right, about forming and incorporating a new municipal corporation, and then with your leadership set and sail, right, on that journey. So, in terms of risk, though, we're going to talk about the fiduciary role of being a public official. We'll talk about transparency a little bit, mostly give you an update on some things we're seeing around the open meetings law. Talk about organizational structure and liability. The last 2 topics we do separate trainings on. Happy to come back and do those for you, but I just want to highlight a couple of things with regard to ethics and personal conduct, and then also quasi-judicial decision-making, which, as you continue on this journey, you're probably going to start doing more of that because have you finished up a comp plan?
We're
finishing up a comp plan, and you adopted a zoning map for the city, and you're putting a land development review process in place. So Those applications are going to start coming in, right? And then you all are going to end up being judges, right, of these applications. So I'm going to talk about what that means from a risk standpoint, okay? My standard disclaimer, I probably made it last time, is though I am an attorney, this of course is not an attorney-client discussion. So if you do have a burning question about something that's going on right here and now, right, in the town for which you need legal advice, that's for Jennifer. And so thank you, Jennifer, being here. I can throw all the tough questions to you. And same thing if it's, maybe it's not a legal issue, if it's something in your manager's wheelhouse, my radar will tell me that's kind of the burning issue for the here and now for which you need your manager support, right? So I'm happy to provide input from our risk management perspective, but I'll probably beg off if my radar is telling me your questions about something in the here and now. Which does, before I dive into my next slide, does, particularly for the new folks, kind of elevates one of my primary risk management suggestions for you as members of the governing body, both individually and collectively. At the end of the day, as the elected officials, right, our role is we're the elected part-time, essentially volunteer legislators and policymakers for the organization. But as you know, municipal corporations do a lot of things, and they're active in a lot of different service areas, a lot of different functions, and each one of those creates its own kind of risk and needs its own kind of resources. So one of my primary risk management suggestions is to recognize, particularly for the governing body, your direct reports, your town attorney and your town manager, right, are there as your resource to help enable you, right, to succeed, to get things done, and to look good while doing it, and to manage risk while you do it, right? So particularly for the new folks, as you're getting oriented, always fine to make that call, that tactful inquiry to the manager or attorney. Why do we do this? What are the rules? How do I get oriented to this? And that'll help you get up to speed on how the municipality works. All right, let's go to the next slide. One of the things to remember now that you're in elected public services, and the incumbents know this, but we remember we're fiduciaries, right? Municipal corporations are corporations, right? And that fiduciary concept, the way I describe it, is it's the obligation under law to put the interest of the organization that we serve as a fiduciary, right? The town of Keystone as a corporation, right? To put those interests and the public interest above all other interests, right? Let's go to the next slide. That's sometimes going to require, right, that we make sure that we're putting the town interest, right, above personal interest. Above, do you ever have, well, you got a year or more of meetings under your belt as an official organization. Have you ever had any meetings where the room's kind of full and emotions are running high? Yeah, and what's our population for the town?
1,200.
1,200, so even if we pack the room, we've got maybe 30 or 40 of the 1,200 people, right? So you want to be careful of this risk dynamic. Sometimes you're going to have a high profile matter on the agenda, emotions are going to be running high. And during the comment period, you're saying, council, passionately saying, council, you got to do this and you got to do it right now, right? But if you're thinking, I'm not sure that's the best thing to do for the town as an entity or for the long haul, right? Remember that one of your risk management tools, and frankly, one of your prerogatives as the governing body, is to take the time you need and get the information that you need, right? That will help you make defensible decisions, that will help you reduce risk around potential challenges to your decisions, right? And that will serve the best interest of the town. Yeah, it might be frustrating for the folks who are in the audience who want you to do something right away then tonight. But in terms of managing the risk, if you feel like, we haven't as a governing body had the time and space to have a full deliberation of this issue, then hey, let's continue to another meeting where each and every one of us as co-equals on the governing body can have that deliberation. Or maybe it's something where you need input from John and his team. Hey, where is this on our work plan? What are our priorities? Do we have resources? Or maybe it's even a legal issue where you need time to ask Jennifer, well, citizens are asking us to do this. Should we even get involved in that area? What's our authority? What are the pros and cons and legal risks around that issue? So those are all aspects of serving that fiduciary responsibilities to recognize the broader public interest. Make sure we understand it's our obligation to put those broader interests above narrow, personal, single issue or other interests. And always to consider issues on their merits alone, right? There's certainly going to be issues where sometimes there's that little tug or buzz going on around these issues where people when I can script you into looking at an issue in a way that's not the right, whatever that may be, is the night, right, geez, not the right lens to be looking at that issue. So you want to keep your broader obligation in mind and remember that the obligation is to be a good representative and fiduciary of the entire community on behalf with regard to all issues that come in front of the council. All right, let's go on the next slide. Talk a little bit about transparency. For the newer members, have you gotten the nickel tour yet of the Colorado Open Meetings Law? Right, is this your first time in public service or you've been involved in some public boards before? Yeah, so we all know that public life, the expectation of transparency of the citizens and the requirements under law for transparency are much, much different, right? And so we all know the base rule, right? Whenever 3 or more members of the council meet to discuss public business, that's a meeting that has to be open to the public, right? And then the second big rule, any action of the council can only occur in an open public meeting for which an agenda has been posted in advance. In fact, as the governing body, you can only exercise your authority, you can only take action through a duly called and agendized public meeting, okay? So in our world around the claims issues that we see at CIRSA, we have to be careful of this risk. The openness rule really is a rule of 3. 3 or more members of the council want to have a discussion, that's got to be an open meeting. The openness rule does not apply to a one-on-one discussion. So, you know, the new members, it's part of the job, frankly, right? You sit down with the mayor or another council member and have a cup of coffee and build relationships, get to understand one another. That's perfectly fine, right? So rule 3, openness applies for 3 or more. It doesn't apply for one-on-one. But what do you think about this dynamic? What do you think about one-on-one on one-on-one on one-on-one, right? That's, they got all sorts of names for that, serial meeting, daisy chain meeting, right? To cut to the chase on the legal issue, make sure that we self-police as a council, right? And we intuitively know where the line is drawn. Make sure that we are not using serial discussions or daisy chain conversations as a substitute for the deliberations that must occur in council chambers. Right? The way that judges look at it is if the evidence comes in that what has occurred at your meeting is a mere rubber stamping of a decision that was made by some parallel process outside of the public meeting process, then that's where the open meeting violation most likely is going to lie. So be careful of that issue, okay? Recognize that a meeting for purposes of this risk includes any kind of gathering, whether it's in person like we're doing now, or by phone, or by electronic means. And that's why staff is coaching you, right? Email's a fine tool for a lot of things, but not for deliberations among 3 or more members of the policy issue that you have pending in front of you. That's why staff's going to probably coach on that idea when the manager sends out an email that says that, oh, here's some information, just it's FYI only. We don't want to dive in and start having a conversation among the members of the council. Oh, okay, thank you for that information, manager. Oh, to my fellow council members, how would you like to vote on this issue? And now we're all trading emails. What's the problem with that? It's not, that conversation is not to the public, okay? So that idea of electronic communications triggering the open meetings law, what do you think about texts? Text messaging, would that apply? Yeah, I think the rule, it does electronic communications by any means, right? And I always like to mention this because it didn't involve a CIRSA member. That point was driven home quite vividly in a high-profile way. Remember our state legislature a year or so ago got crosswise with the open meetings law by using, what was it, Slack, I think, one of these disappearing message apps. Yeah, and their own membership in the state legislature questioned, what are we doing communicating, right, among multiple members by this emailing? Isn't that a open meetings problem, right? So they admitted that it was. They said they weren't going to do it, and then they amended the statute to give themselves more leeway, but they didn't amend the statute in a way that gave local governments more leeway, right? Only the state legislature. So remember that rule 3 still applies to electronic communications. Okay, the flip side of that, for the new members, have you attended an executive session yet? Okay, I'm sure you got a great process dialed in, right, to make sure all the T's are crossed and I's are dotted during the announcement before you go into executive session. But in terms of policing that risk, I would encourage everyone just to make sure we keep our ears open during that part of the meeting. And from where you sit in helping manage that risk, it's never inappropriate or out of line for someone to just, if it didn't sound right, just, did we get everything right? Right? Did we announce the topic? Did we announce the legal citation? Did we announce the subject matter that we're going to discuss in executive session? Is everything hunky-dory there? Because once you finish that and go into executive session, you don't have a chance for a do-over, right? And in our world, in the claims world, there is a little cottage industry. The wonderful thing about local governments is they are transparent, and a lot of information about them is accessible. But in terms of claims around the open meetings law, there's actually a cottage industry around the state where we have attorneys or other interest groups who listen to your meeting recordings, look at your agenda, scour your minutes, looking for technical violations of the open meetings law with respect to executive sessions. And they'll do that both in terms of when you go into executive session, and they'll also try and ferret out if you stayed on topic when you were in the executive session. So be careful of that. As fiduciaries, it's your responsibility to manage your own conversation in executive session. So make sure when you're in that executive session that you stay on point, that you only discuss the topic that's authorized for the executive session, right? And that you have a mutual understanding of how you're going to protect confidential information. So maybe a good way to get on the same page there is before you break from the executive session, whether it's the mayor or someone else leading the discussion. And this can come up a lot on executive sessions for matters subject to negotiation. Have you had an executive session for that? Yeah, I understand maybe you're buying some property. Did you have an executive session for that? Yeah. And so in that executive session, it's only natural that you're going to get some background information. And you may be asking yourself, you know, we're working on developing our strategy, which you're allowed to do in executive session. But you're wondering, well, which parts of this, if any of this, is confidential and which is public, right? So a good tool is maybe the mayor or whoever's leading the discussion says, before we break and leave the executive session, we say to ourselves, okay, of all the confidential information that we've discussed in executive session, which information, if any, leaves this room and who's our spokesperson? Now we're on the same page, right? And as fiduciaries, we're obligated to honor that commitment to confidentiality, even if we voted against going into executive session, and even if we can't stand the underlying issue being discussed. It's our obligation as fiduciaries to honor that. So what's your remedy if you're a member who says, well, wait a second, everything has to be confidential? Isn't there something we can share with the public? What's your remedy? Is it to go out and tell a citizen, hey, here's what we talked about in executive session? No, I think that would run against your code of ethics, and would also kind of run against your commitment to each other, right? It's kind of that rub of next time if somebody's letting out confidential information, they're kind of in a position to have to come back to the rest of the council later on and say, well, gee, you know, guess, am I okay here, right? I think your remedy is to talk again with the council, right? In the next session or at some other point in time, we say, is there anything that we collectively as a group decide that we can share? Okay. Another thing that I think is good for building faith and trust in government, but also helps tamp down the risk exposure a little bit, I think, is use opportunities to remind your citizens why you're having the executive session. You know, maybe after you leave executive session, you just say something when you're back in open session. Hey, just a quick reminder that the executive session was for a matter subject to negotiation. I want to confirm that that's all we discussed was strategy. And we gave our negotiators some direction. I want to assure everyone that if our negotiations ever get traction, there will be future agenda items. We do not and did not and will never make any decisions in executive session. People, that helps drive home the point that you're acting in your citizens' best interest when you decide to have that private conversation. Okay? All right, let's go to the next slide. Do you all, the new folks, did you all, well, all of you, do you get a town issued email address? Okay, I would encourage you to use that when you're wearing your hat as a public official. Recognize that separate from the openness requirement that's a trigger under the open meetings law, recognize it says right there in state statute that the correspondence of elected officials is a matter of public record, with some limited exceptions that staff will help you with. But the way it looks to me in practical terms is that means be circumspect in your use of email. Don't say in an email wearing your public official hat anything that you wouldn't want to say in a public meeting, or have read to you in the newspaper, or read in the newspaper, or in my world, have read back to you in a deposition. right? Recognize also there's a broader net. It is quite common that citizens or others will ask the clerk through an open records request for the emails of the elected officials, right? And then we have a legal obligation to produce those, right? So that's why I encourage you to use your town issued email address. That makes it easier for the staff and IT to find the emails that are responsive to the request. There are no guarantees in this world, so it doesn't guarantee that there won't, if you ever face, knock on wood, you'll never have this. But once in a while, we have full-blown litigation where the other side wants to get a swipe of an elected or appointed official's personal hard drive, right? But if you have a healthy habit of using your town-issued email address, right, and we're very circumspect about how we use emails, our defense attorneys can help fight those requests, and we can help very efficiently deal with that issue if we ever have a civil discovery request for your emails. And the scope of civil discovery is broader than what the public records laws require, okay? So all of that just means we need to be cautious in our use of electronic communications, right? And you've seen all this, and hopefully whenever we see this, it's reading about somebody else who's not a municipality in Colorado, right? Any questions about that stuff? Okay. Yeah, whether something is subject to the open records is whether it has to do with, whether the communication has something to do with the performance of your duties as an elected official or has to deal with public funds. It doesn't matter what device it was created on, right? So even if you're at home and you leave is that a town issued laptop? You forgot your town issued laptop and now you're writing an email at home on your personal computer, but it's an email in your capacity as council member, right? It's the content that triggers the point that is potentially subject to CORA and discovery, okay? All right, staff's there to help you with any of that stuff?
You're using your home computer.
Yeah.
But your town email account,
Yes.
does that satisfy does that put at risk your private information on your home computer?
No, that's fine. I admittedly am on the scorched earth side of the downstream when the claims come. That effort to get at someone's personal computer from where you sit usually only arises when there's some full-blown litigation where the claim is a civil rights violation or employment claim, where the plaintiff is making an allegation that the decision makers, you all, made the decision with some animus that was discriminatory or something like that, and they're trying to make discovery about your state of mind that helps prove the discriminatory or retaliatory animus. And particularly in federal court, the federal judges don't want to manage all this stuff. So they're more inclined to just say, all right, well, it's necessary to determine whether there's evidence on that issue, we're going to allow that to happen. Of course, it all happens under a protective order. It's not like the parties can take that swipe of your drive and start using information for any other purposes. But in an extreme case, there is the possibility that in one of those motive or animus cases, someone can make a discovery request that might try to reach as far as your personal electronic devices. So good thing to keep your world separate as best you can. That helps you. And is anybody active on social media? Before you got elected, the people who knew you before you got elected or appointed to the council, they still know you and they still know how to reach you privately by social media or your other email addresses. Just recognize you have every right to tell that person, hey, this is not where I do my town business. If you've got a communication you'd like to send to us as council members, please send it to this email address. And then lastly, just on managing the whole information flow, I would encourage you to include your town manager on these, because then it gets into your manager can be your eyes and ears. If you got a communication about some matter of town business, he can help spot, for example, whether it's an issue that needs to be, the discussion needs to be cut off and put on an agenda, right? He can help whether there's FYI information that needs to be gathered up and shared with everyone. That kind of thing. So good communication flow is important in that regard. All right, let's, any thoughts, questions on that? Let's keep going. Let's talk about organizational structure and liability for the new members. I certainly hope it wasn't your first question for Jennifer, but there's a fair question of, can I get sued and be held individually and personally liable for something that I do or don't do as a council member? And well, the answer is yes, it's possible. But the great news is it's unlikely, highly unlikely, right? And in fact, we have good protections for you in Colorado. the town, and by extension, CIRSA, is required to defend you and pay judgments against you for acts or omissions as a council member. Great news. Subject to some, everything's got a catch, right? Well, here's the catch. Those protections are subject to a couple of limitations. Those protections apply only so long as we're acting within the scope of our employment and not acting willfully and wantonly. So scope of employment just means staying within the job description and duties that I have as an elected official and not going outside of the scope of my duties, right? Let me give you an easy example. Under your organizational structure, under your own organizational chart, within whose scope of employment is it to decide whether a line employee of the town gets hired or fired? Is that within the job duties of an individual council member? No, that would be outside the scope of their employment, right? Under your own ordinances, the ordinances that you adopted not too long ago, within whose scope of employment, within whose job duties is it to decide in the first instance whether someone gets a short-term rental license? Right? Town clerk. The ordinance says it's the town clerk, right? The council has a role in that process, but only if someone makes a second level appeal after having their license denied by the town clerk and the town manager. So it's not within an individual elected official's scope of employment to get involved in that initial licensing decision, right? You did have a role in the whole SDR. The part that was in your scope of employment was to decide what's our legislative framework, what's our policy framework for regulating short-term rentals, okay? So that scope of employment, willful and wanton conduct is just bad stuff. It's misusing our governmental authority to do bad things to people for the wrong reasons, right? And that risk only arises, we get a couple of claims that allege that every year. And it's almost always this. It's almost always an allegation that an individual elected or appointed official acting individually, misperceiving that they had some governmental authority that they actually didn't have, throws on the purported cloak of governmental authority and starts doing bad things to people for wrong reasons. And it really would be bad stuff. It would be like, oh, you know, maybe it's an elected or appointed official conscripting the building official in this campaign to make sure that my business competitor never gets a building permit, right? Or that I know I have a clear conflict of interest, but I'm gonna stay in there and participate because that person who applied is also my business competitor or my political enemy, and I'm gonna make sure they don't get any approvals for no good reason, right? Or intentionally defaming someone, right? Publishing private facts with an intent to harm someone, all those kinds of things. It's all criminal misbehaviors. That's all bad stuff. We know what it is. We're going to stay far away from it. So I don't mean to sound like the Grim Reaper. I just need to make sure we understand that there are limitations, right, to the protections that we have. The good thing to remember is that if we remember that our job, primarily as an elected official, is to be but one member of a collective decision-making body, and we put our energy and effort around the work of the body as a whole, and we do our work collectively, then it's very, very rare and difficult for someone to attempt to pursue that individual claim against an individual member. Because you can hear it now. What if you have like a rezoning request and the applicant, you know, they see that they're, for valid defensible reasons, they see you're about to vote no because it didn't meet your standards. And in a last ditch effort to save their application, they say, council, you know, if you vote down my rezoning request, I'm going to sue just you. What do you, right? There's no exposure there because you're just acting as one of the group of decision makers. There's no individual opportunity for scope of employment claim against one member in that regard. Okay, any questions around that piece? Let's go on to the next slide. When I was talking about those protections, I was talking about state law and whether you could be sued in state court under state law for basically bodily injury or personal injury claims. At the Fed, the double whammy is, of course, local government officials are exposed to potential liability under both federal and state law. So you also do have a nice protection at the federal level called qualified immunity. We hear a lot of it when we talk about policing, but the concept of qualified immunity applies to all governmental actors, and you're all governmental actors. The good news is your protected qualified immunity says basically you're immune from suit or personal individual liability under federal law, so long as, or insofar as, our conduct does not violate clearly established statutory or constitutional rights of which a reasonable person would have known. And from where you sit as the part-time volunteer citizen legislature, I always thought the most interesting phrase for you was that last one, would have known. How do I know, right? Whether we are treading down the path towards potential federal liability. Jennifer, we have a question. Your risk management tool in that regard, what if my developer in my hypothetical a moment ago, right, was not saying he's going to sue, or he was saying he's going to sue, he's going to say, you're violating my civil rights, if you, right? Well, the job didn't ask us to all be experts in civil rights, but it asked us to have a good risk radar, right, as the decision makers to know when we need to have resources or need to slow down a process to get some advice from our team, right, about what are the pros and cons. You know, just to give you examples of high profile risk issues where it's appropriate, absolutely appropriate to take that time and get that legal advice includes things like STRs. There's a lot of litigation going on about what's allowed and not allowed in STR licensing schemes, right? A lot of land use issues raise those kinds of things, right? Federal potential liability. So if you ever have one of those moments and you're feeling a little out there, then make sure you take the time you need and get the input you need to help you identify a good path forward in the face of a potential federal law liability. Okay? All right, let's go to the next slide. This whole organizational structure piece, it's, let's see. It's important to remember the legislative administrative distinction. I don't hammer on it too much, but truly is under your charter and your organizational structure, a distinction between the legislative side of the organization, that's you all as the council, and the administrative side of the organization. It's even reflected in your charter, right? The council is the legislative and governing body, and your manager is your chief administrative officer. So that means in terms of thinking about what's my job description, what's my scope of employment, individually and collectively, the council as the legislative body, right, wants to spend its effort and energy around the legislative activities, the policy-making activities, the corporate governance role that only the council can fill, right? And then recognize that your manager and staff are there to get the work done in accordance with the policies and priorities as determined by the council. Let's go on to the next slide. And that serves to protect you. And as you know this, in every municipal organization, this idea of allocation of authorities is everywhere, whether it's the police department or clerk, right, or the treasurer or the elections official or the land use department. All of those delegations of authority, whether they're by state law or your own charter or your own ordinances, they're all there to help serve and protect the organization and to serve and protect you, right? Because borrowing the STR example again, you decided that you were going to delegate functions to staff. Isn't that, when you flip that coin over, that's an affirmation that we as council, we don't want that administrative piece of it. We just want the policy side of it, right? Okay, so a couple of tips around role discipline is just to make sure we understand what our powers and duties are, as important what powers and duties are assigned to others, right? Recognize that we primarily do our work as elected officials as a body, right? And do most of we do have like ambassador eyes and ears around the community, but we do most of our work and definitely exercise our authority only by having group discussions and making decisions in public meetings, right? In terms of risk management, I think that means we want to have an attitude where we're thinking about collaboration and cooperation. And by that, I don't mean 7-0 all the time. I mean working together to bring others around to our point of view. The risk issue that we see is it can be a red flag if we're thinking in terms of I rather than we, right? Well, I don't like the council's decision. You decide what you want to do. I'm going to do this. I ought to be very circumspect in that regard, right? And then another warning sign, Mayor, do you have during council meetings an opportunity for council reports? Yeah. So this may never create a third-party liability, but it's kind of a good governance principle that I mentioned. What if during the council member reports, somebody says, oh, yes, Mayor, I've got something to report. Since our last meeting, I did this. And all the other council members' eyes open wide. You did what? Right? That may never give rise to a third-party liability, but it's a wise counsel that has its eyes open to that issue, because it's important to have that conversation and try as best you can to have norms of conduct and understandings about how we represent the council and the organization in between meetings. Now, it's been an issue for me. People go, why are you talking about this if it's never a third-party liability claim? And I say, well, it has been in extreme cases where people want to discipline or remove someone for behavior that the others thought was inappropriate in between meetings. I really mention it because I want people to be supported. You're busy enough with the work that you do, but if you raise your hand to do something in between the meeting, you know, on behalf of council, yes, I'll go talk to this regional group or that regional group. It's a wise body that has a conversation about, well, what's our position? What should I be conveying, right? So that there's not those surprise moments during reports where we have some tension potentially building up, right? Okay. Let's go on to the next slide. The whole idea of role discipline is particularly important with regard to employee relationships and the handling of administrative matters. So I know we're continuing to build the organization. What's the size of our employment base at this point? How many employees we have?
7.
7. All right. How many does the council directly supervise? 2?
Well, we directly supervise, but we have a contractual relationship with the attorney.
So the manager and the attorney at this point, right? So that means, and our charter reflects this as well, that means that the council only has a couple of direct reports, does not directly supervise all the employees of the town. We all agree with that? Yep. Okay, as an organization that deals with many hundreds of employment practices liability claims, I will tell you from your perspective, what a great place to be, right? Because the ballot said, I am being elected to be the citizen, part-time volunteer, legislator, leader, policymaker on behalf of this organization and community. I am not running for HR manager, right? So remember that piece. Now, with regard to your direct reports, you do want to have good, mutually agreed upon systems for evaluating performance, giving direction, that kind of thing. But recognize that it's not the role of the elected or appointed officials to be the supervisors of individual line employees below, right, your direct reports. In fact, that's enshrined in your charter, right? There's a section there, section 7.7, that says, except for the purpose of making specific inquiries, all members of the council shall deal with the administrative personnel or consultants solely through the town manager or the town manager's designee, and shall give orders to staff. That's a great thing. Because just like the private sector analog that has a board of directors CEO, right? Then you as the governing body benefit from that relationship where you essentially have board of directors CEO. We just happen to call it council town manager, right? So not naive around this issue though. I know, because I did what Jennifer did for many years before I joined, went over to Sursa, is the pressure can come from many places. What if a citizen came to town hall and they had an interaction with a staff member and they didn't think it went the way they want? What might be their natural inclination? Call the council member or the mayor and say, you got to do something about that employee, right? Worst case, they call you, council, you need to fire this employee, right? What are you going to do with that information? You're going to call your manager and unburden yourself of this, right? And just say, manager, I want you to know I got a call about from a citizen who's angry about some issue. Could you look into it and do whatever you need to do? I don't even know about it because it's your responsibility, right? And just like, I forgot to mention this for constitutional civil rights risk. For that risk and also for employment matters, you want to give your manager or your attorney some grace. On the personnel side, when you unburden yourself to the manager, it's okay for him to say, I got it, because that's protecting you, right? Just like if you go, the developer slams his fist and say, you're violating my constitutional rights, and you say to Jennifer, are we violating this person? And the answer might be, well, it depends. That good lawyerly answer, right? But you do, if it comes from outside, someone's got an issue with staff, you just want to unburden yourself, give that to the manager. Right? It can come from inside too. What if somebody comes in and says, can I talk to you about my boss? Okay. You want to have a ready message for that. I think it's, hey, we love and support our staff, but I as a council member and we as a council don't get involved in personnel matters at that level. I would encourage you to talk to your supervisor or the town manager, right? If it is a really difficult situation for which the council needs to have some information, then your attorney or manager will keep you informed on a need-to-know basis, right? Why is it need to know only, right? Well, there's this risk in the legal world called retaliation, right? Part of protecting people from retaliation risk is making sure that we limit the flow of information so that people aren't exposed improperly to a who knew what when, so that an accusation of retaliation can be made against them. So be careful of that. Know that you have wonderful systems in place that you probably had a hand in developing the overarching policy for. But once the personnel issues are within the purview of the manager and supervisor, just be supportive of that process, right? There shouldn't be end runs, because if you allow the chain of command to break down, how do you ever get that back, right? Okay, any questions about that stuff?
Yeah, a stupid one. Remind me what SOE means.
Which one?
SOE?
Oh, scope of employment.
Employment. Yeah.
Okay, let's go to the next slide. Just a couple more tips around this stuff. I think this all translates then into some suggestions like establishing in collaboration with your manager, the process, whatever it looks like to you all, right? For surfacing or bringing forward questions that you have or that citizens have about administrative matters. Make sure you use the manager and staff as a resource for accurate information. Be careful of that. The citizen, absolutely, we want to be approachable, and we're a flat organization, probably want to hear from citizens, right? But be careful of the notion that sometimes they may be coming to you with one side of the story, right? And so we want to make sure we have accurate information on that issue. And then particularly with licensing and permitting issues, be careful that you're not inappropriately being conscripted into an attempted end run, right? You as policymakers and legislators, just in looking at your list of ordinances of things you've already done, you've put so much effort and work into setting up great processes. You want to be a champion of those processes now that we're into the administrative, right, administration of those policies, right? So yeah, in administrative matters, sometimes there will be perceptions that there are winners and losers, that the process is too difficult. But for the new members, well, I'll ask everybody, do you like a process? Do you like process? Right? We sometimes get a bad rap in local government, but process is intentional to make sure people are treated fairly and that we make consistent decisions. So you want to be champion of those processes, even if people are trying to tug on you to see if there's a way to short circuit a process or find an end run. Okay. Running the other direction, as a governing body, as I mentioned, recognize that we each bring our own voice, but we're all working towards the one voice of council. So to encapsulate that in one phrase, it's absolutely the case of, deliberate with many voices, fight like heck for your point of view, deliberate with many voices, but speak with one voice, whatever that looks like, When you give direction to your direct reports, if you want to be clear in your direction, that's where you get clarity, credibility, accountability to your voice, right? So that can be difficult sometimes, but you'll work through those. The tough situation might be you have a discussion and the mayor says, great discussion, council, let's give some direction to John. And we go around the table and we have 7 different ideas on what the direction ought to be. So we turn to John and say, John, you got your direction? And John checks his watch and goes, how much energy you have left for this, right? But who owns that issue? You do, you're the boss, right? Yeah, so you're gonna work through that, but you wanna commit to bring it back. Maybe you don't get there that evening, but you gotta commit to bringing it back at the next work session, whatever it takes. You might even have to put it to a vote. And if you do, and it's a 4-3 vote, that's fine, but now at least our voice is clear. The risk that I see that can unfold is if we don't commit to that as the owners of that issue, then the dynamics can break down, communication can break down, confusion can arise. Maybe members later on are swinging by the manager's office and saying, hey, manager, that was a messy discussion the other night, but here's what I want you to do. Is that consistent with the voice of we, right? Would you as a council member be a little upset if another council member who had 180 different view of what the direction ought to be, we're doing that, right? So I have to be careful and make sure, hey, we can work it out. We can work it out, right? And the mayors, you're your guiding light, right, in finding those times and opportunities to work through those issues so that we speak with clarity on those issues. All right, let's, unless, are there any questions about structure, organizational stuff? Let's flip over and talk about ethics real quick. Congratulations. You have a brand new, as I understand it, a brand new code of ethics that's how many days old? Has it taken effect yet? Maybe it hasn't. It was published after its passage in late October, and then it's been published, and we waited 30 days, and here it is. And it's I had a chance to peruse it, and if you'll allow me, I'm going to put that in my library and share it with other communities that are looking for codes of ethics. It's an excellent, excellent document. So, but for the new members in particular, well, for everybody, since it's a new code, just make sure you get a good working familiarity with what that code requires. I think the best risk management solution that I can offer you with regard to ethics is twofold. First, make the code of ethics your best friend. And that's not an overstatement. What I mean by best friend is make sure you have a good working familiarity with what the rules are so that you're prepared to spot and address issues before they become full-blown crises in the moment. In that regard, in terms of risk management resources, I hope I don't speak out of turn, but your manager and your attorney, if you are not sure whether you have an ethics issue, you're not sure what you should do in that regard, they always appreciate, they would love to hear from you earlier than later, right? They can't serve as your individual ethics advisor, but they can give you guidance from their point of view as the town attorney and town manager on this is what the code says, this is what the intent of that provision was. You still have the right to make the decision, subject to some other things that I'll mention in a second. But they're there to help you succeed and help you protect yourself. A code of ethics violation is that one area where it truly is, if there's ultimate liability, it is a personal, individual liability, right? So use the resources, whatever they are, to help you spot issues and deal with them effectively, right? And early. It's much better to have that conversation with Jennifer and her team before the night of the meeting to figure out whether you got a conflict that requires recusal than to have it arise for the first time when a citizen stands up and says, I believe Councilmember Martin should not be participating in this proceeding, sorry, but if I may borrow, he should not be participating because he's got a conflict of interest and he needs to recuse himself. In that heat of the moment, we have to stop and have a little mini determination, right? So we spot those issues early, we're better prepared to deal. Yeah. I did notice that my asterisk on my earlier comment, I did notice that your code of ethics actually has a provision that says the remaining members of the body may vote to determine whether someone has to recuse themselves. So you'll have to honor that provision as well, right? Just make sure we use that tool in the spirit and intent in which it was codified, right? With good faith at all times, right? That's a very powerful tool, never to be misused, right? But it's a helpful tool when needed. We just want to make sure we use it wisely. Other ethics rules, make sure we understand the rules around confidential information and gifts. And my last one among my two was one, make the ethics rules your best friend. And second, do you agree with this notion? In matters of ethics, no matter what we think individually, fair or unfair, in matters of ethics, isn't it the case that sometimes reality equals perception and perception equals reality? Right? So make sure you have that thought within your calculus as you're looking at these issues. Because it's absolutely true that you could go through the ordinance, do all the analysis and get to a point in time where you say, I don't have any conflict that requires my recusal under the code of ethics, so I'm going to stay in there. But there might still be a residue. What do you do with that? Right? You know how it feels in the room. It's like you're in the room and you've done all the analysis, but everybody out here doesn't know that, right? And they're still kind of, oh, why is he participating, right? Never underestimate the value of what I call kind of a curative disclosure. You know, maybe if that cloud is still kind of out there, I'll give you an example of how you could make a curative disclosure. Maybe the matter comes up on the agenda and you say, Mayor, you know, can I just make a comment before we start this discussion? Now, I've heard some gossip or rumors or some suggestion that I should be recusing myself because I have a conflict of interest. I just want to let everyone know that I've, you know, and you go through the comment, particularly if you're going to stay in, I just want everybody to know, in the state for the record, that I do not have any prohibited interest as defined under our code, right? I don't have any personal interest that requires my recusal, and I want to assure everyone that that's the case, and also that I intend to look at this matter solely on its merits alone, like every other matter. That's a great thing to have on the record from where we sit, right? Because to me, it's kind of a put up or you know what, with regard to, particularly on a quasi-judicial proceeding, if someone else doesn't jump up and say, well, I disagree. It's not that their right to bring an ethics violation doesn't go poof, but in terms of making a hearing record at that point in time, if somebody believes that you have a conflict of interest that requires you to recuse from a quasi-judicial matter, if we've been very transparent in raising it and putting on record, then really they need to get it out there and into the hearing. Okay. Any thoughts, anything else about ethics? All right, last thing we got on your radar. I'm just going to leave these here. Beyond the code of ethics, I think the job does sometimes ask us to engage in personal conduct that we might not like personally prefer, but I think is in terms of strengthening the council as an organization, behaviors like committing to the understanding that personally I have to be willing to set aside a personal agenda item or personal interest when there's lack of support. You may say, well, I wanted to get on council. My only reason for wanting to be on council is so that we have an ordinance that does this. But if I can't find 3 members that want to go along, then I got to shelve that in view of service of the work plan of the group. Okay, I'll leave the other ones there. Last thing I want to get on your radar is the quasi-judicial process. Let's go ahead to the next slide. We all kind of have a sense of that issue. We've got some training on what this distinction means. Yeah, just by way of broad context, in Colorado, it's quite a great thing that we have the power locally as the town council to make decisions involving certain matters that truly are of local concern, like land development applications, or whether or not someone gets a license. Are you the liquor licensing authority? But when we're making those kinds of decisions, when there's a specific applicant in front of us, asking us for permission one way or the other to do something with regard to those constitutionally protected property interests, like their interest in their property or the anticipated interest in a license, then there's a whole different set of rules that apply to the way we need to conduct ourselves. Because in that role, we're not legislators or policymakers, we're judges standing in judgment of a specific application that's in front of us. And we want that power among the 1,200 people in the community. Isn't it interesting that only 7 people, along with the planning commission, get to decide whether someone's allowed to rezone their property? That's a pretty powerful thing, right? But the grand bargain is to make sure when we exercise that power that we're honoring their due process rights. It all comes from that phrase, no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, okay? And I've left you a handout about this to introduce this concept to you, but what it really means is, with regard to those kinds of matters, the quasi-judicial rules of engagement require that we conduct ourselves differently before, during, and after the public hearing, right? And that's true individually and collectively. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Just to give you some examples. Like when and I'll show you how this legislative distinction works. You passed an ordinance, I think, also to put in a framework liquor licensing rules for the town. When you worked on that ordinance, that was just the legislation for the policy framework, right? But if you're gonna, for example, as the town council, revoke someone's liquor license, that's not a legislative process, that's quasi-judicial. And in that context, the quasi-judicial process, we're basically having like a due process hearing. We give extra notice to the interested parties. Everybody has a right to come in front of council and offer their evidence. Our decision has to be based on the pre-existing legal standards, and the decision has to be made by a fair and impartial decision maker. See how that's so much different than the idea of just adopting the original policy in the first case? Like when you worked on that original ordinance, you could lobby and be lobbied. You could vote yes or no for certain aspects of that ordinance based on your own personal viewpoints, right? You could do your own research about liquor licensing schemes and that kind of stuff. But now that you have a policy framework in place and you have this potential role of being the judges, you have to set aside those legislative type of behaviors and commit yourself to the judicial type behaviors, okay? Some of the big ticket ones are when you have a land use application, for example, that's quasi judicial, have to make sure that we're staying away from having contacts with the applicant or the proponents or the opponents about the merits of the hearing outside of the hearing, right? That would be improper, right? We have to make sure we remain fair and impartial. You don't have marijuana, right? This came up a lot in marijuana because I had a lot of communities where by initiative or some other means, they ended up having marijuana in their community, and then the governing body sat in judgment of the license requests. But some of the people wearing their policymaking hat said, well, I was never in favor of marijuana. So the newspaper reporter would call them up and say, oh, I see you got a license application for a marijuana establishment. And somebody, one of the elected or appointed officials who had authority to make the licensing decision was saying something like, well, I never wanted them here in this community and I will never vote in favor of a license for a marijuana facility. Does that sound like a fair judge of the application? No, okay. So you have to remain fair and impartial. Of course, we have to handle conflicts of interest correctly. The most important thing from a risk management standpoint in terms of your decisions being challenged is to make sure when you get to these points in these hearings that we understand that your deliberations is the magic part of the hearing. That's where the council is going to have its discussion among the council and articulate the reasons we're going to vote yes or no for this application. And when we have that deliberation, we need to make sure that we're focusing the discussion only on the information that we've heard during the hearing about the application, and that we're discussing how we're going to decide the matter only under the pre-existing legal standards. Okay? So I'll give you an example of how that works. Let's say you have a liquor, have you gone through a liquor hearing yet? Not yet.
For revocation?
Or for, how about for a new one?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, and those are quasi judicial as well, Jennifer? Yeah. So this will show you how we need to think and act like judges. So we have a nice hearing for the new liquor license application, and the mayor says, great hearing, everybody. Let's bring it back and discuss how we want to decide this. And I say, and he says, who would like to start? The mayor, I'd like to start. I'm going to vote no because I don't like it. Good start? Not a good start. But we can get there just using Sam's rule of why. Just another member of council says, okay, Sam, why don't you like it? I'm going to vote no because I don't like it because the applicant didn't donate to our Christmas party. That's when staff's going to jump in and say, no, 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 not an existing criteria, not a permissible legal standard. Or maybe Sam is, council member Sam is way off the mark. He doesn't like the applicant, but he also says, I'm going to vote no because I don't like it because I don't drink. That's also a legally impermissible standard, right? But so let's say Sam's got it act together actually. He says, I'm going to vote no because I don't like it because it doesn't meet our standards. Now we're getting somewhere. Are we done? We got to ask again, rule of why. Why doesn't it meet our standards? Sam said, I don't like it. I'm going to vote no because it doesn't meet our standards because the applicant is not of good moral character. That's a legally permissible standard. Are we done? I'm going to go down one more layer. Why isn't the applicant not of good moral character? And that's when we're probably looking at the staff report and the information that the law enforcement officials gathered in the background check, and we're putting on the record, I'm going to vote no because I don't like it because it doesn't meet our standards because the applicant's not a good moral character, because according to the background report, the applicant's been convicted 6 times of tax fraud and therefore is not worthy of holding a liquor license because of a pattern of untruthful behavior regarding this, something like that. But you see what's going on just by using the rule of why we naturally as council have gotten to a focused discussion of the information that's in the record and the actual criteria that apply. We love that at CIRSA because when you do that, you're making a transcript of the reasons that you're voting, right? It also builds faith and trust in the community, even for the ones that are, quote, no-brainers for approval, where the staff report shows the path and how they've met all the criteria. I think it's still a good thing for the decision makers, even in those easy ones, to say, hey, great work, everybody, good hearing. I just want to say before we vote that my position on this matter is I'm going to vote in favor of the application because it meets all of our standards and criteria as articulated in the staff report. Even something that simple is helpful in terms of helping build a defensible record. Okay? So that's enough on quasi judicial engagement. I've got 2 links at the slide for more information on that. We do trainings on that. I'm sure Jennifer and her team do as well. As you get more and more further and further down your path of an organization and getting into the land use activity and dealing with specific applications, I'd encourage you to get more training on those issues and be prepared to have great hearings and have great processes, right? Nothing builds faith and trust around your quasi-judicial decision-making more than having great processes where everyone sees, right, that you're making the right decision for the right reasons through a fair and defensible process. Okay? All right, that's about it. Let me just go to the concluding thoughts. I think this just wraps up things that we've touched on already. So there's just a list of things there for your consideration. And there's more information about source on the slides together with some other resources. And I think I mentioned all the handouts, one about SURSA, one about email risk for public officials, and one that's our attempt at SURSA just to try and break down what that quasi-judicial role is with a couple examples of how that works. So with that, I'm happy to open it up to any questions, thoughts.
Anyone have a question?
Yes.
On a quasi-judicial, on your unsupported decisions, let's say you have some expertise or knowledge on something that could have a bearing or an important impact on the decision-making process, but it hasn't been presented before us. Is that expertise knowledge then to be not handled or brought up? Or
Yes, is it verbatim? Jennifer, do you want to take this one? Or you want me to go first? I've got some thoughts on it.
I do too, but you can.
All right. Take solace in the fact that you're the judge,
right,
but don't be a witness in your own hearing.
right,
Right?
right.
So, but I think in terms of practicality, you might get there by asking questions of the other people who are giving you testimony. It helps get on the record,
Right.
right, the information that you're looking for. And I'll give you a war story about this. I had a situation with a very highly contested final development plan for a development proposal. The whole issue was about traffic. And the one decision maker, the one council member, didn't like the applicant's traffic study, didn't like the staff's traffic study because he was concerned that measurements weren't taken during peak hours. This was one of those hearings where there were multiple sessions. So at one of the subsequent sessions, he showed up and said, well, as I said during the last hearing, I don't think the applicant's traffic study is credible, and the staff's traffic study bothers me because it didn't appear that you measured traffic counts during peak time. So since our last session of the hearing, I did some of my own traffic counts. Good idea. No, but you can get there by asking questions. Take the time you need and get the information. And there's nothing impermissible about asking a question that helps elicit evidence from the other parties that are testifying in front of you. So,
And that would be at the start of the hearing when you have your public hearing portion, when you're asking staff questions, or you could be asking the applicant those questions. If you don't ask the questions and you just rely on your experience or your expertise, it's not fair to the applicant or the public because they don't know what you're relying on to make your decision.
yeah, and if you ask it in the form of a question, there's a lot of it. I think you naturally, particularly in the contested situation, someone's going to start saying, well, wait a second, there's some influence going on here. He's sharing a lot of his own factual knowledge and expertise. At some point, it might get to be so difficult that you got to figure out how you're going to manage that piece, right? Yeah, so again, it's not that we can all be blank slates and we bring our own experiences to the table, but you got to be willing to let that stuff go as best you can and remember that the obligations on the staff, the applicant, and the other interested parties to bring you relevant information. Yeah, sometimes land use applications can have that ships passing dynamic, maybe it's the final development plan and what we're really doing is just looking at final traffic patterns and architecture and things like that. And people stand up during the public hearing and the first thing they say is, this property should have never been zoned for residential. Well, that ship sailed, right? So the mayor can help with this because he's going to remind everybody, and maybe it's in the staff report, or maybe even have copies, extra copies, where you put on the screen. This is where we are in the process. These are the decision points for us as council this evening. We ask anyone who's going to testify at the hearing, as best you can, folks, give us relevant factual information that relates to these standards, these issues, architecture, traffic, landscaping, because we can't take into consideration opinion testimony, right? That just says vote no. Or we can't take into consideration testimony about the rezoning or the annexation that occurred many, many meetings ago. Yeah. Okay. But if you ask your question, you're in the way of a question, it's going to help us with information.
No, that's great.
Any other
Other
questions?
questions? Sam?
Thank you all so very much.
Yeah, I want to thank you very much. Every time I listen to you speak, I learn something new.
It's great to visit and hear of all your successes, and thanks for having me. I think I need to do that.
You're good.
The next item on the agenda is something that Dan and I put together to piggyback off of some of the things that Sam talked about today. And my portion was the town council planning piece. Dan put the first piece together. When I talked to him last night, I assured him that I would be able to provide his presentation, but please bear with me as we go through this presentation. It kind of ties together what we're doing tonight with the budget, and also, as Sam mentioned, a little bit on goals and strategic objectives as well. And let's go to the next slide. And feel free to interrupt me if we go through the questions. We're going through and approving a budget, hopefully approving a budget tonight. And that annual budget needs to align, it aligns our spending with community priorities. And you can tell when you look at that budget, how it draws down and really where some of our priorities are. And you'll see that later in the presentation. It's also really a policy document because it's implementing policy, and it's also a management tool for us to help guide the staff and giving the direction and the resources that they need to implement priorities that we set. And it's also an important part of that also is financial stewardship, looking at the long term, looking at sustainability issues, and looking at transparency. Next slide. So we've all gone through the budget process. One thing that we didn't do a good job of this year is strategic planning and priority setting before going through the budget. However, as we've gone through the budget, I believe it does reflect the general feeling of council of where those priorities are for the town, although we didn't do a formal process of that. And the town manager's main piece in that strategic planning piece is to advise us on the feasibility of what we want to do, if there's any legal constraints that we have in doing it, and of course the cost. Say we want a sidewalk on the north side of Highway 6 next year. His advice to us would be, you don't have the money. And in fact, we went through it last year in the area of housing. We wanted sense of the council on a whole was we wanted to start putting together a housing plan. And the, manager pushed back and said, hey, I don't have the resources and staff to do that. In the budget this year, the resources are there. Resources that existed at the time weren't there. And that's really John's role in this as we go forward. And John, feel free to jump in as I very bluntly talk about your responsibilities here. The development of that plan is really bottoms up. It starts down at the department level by the town manager, who lays out their requirements to be able to meet our goals and objectives and our priorities. And the manager also then pulls together, looks at efficiency staff needed to do it, the resources needed to pull it off. Of course, capital plans as we're going forward. And the manager and the finance director then develop the budget. And they're looking at everything from capital, from the operating budget, capital improvements, whether it be maintenance of existing infrastructure, establishing new infrastructure, and where we're going in the future. And of course, compliance with state laws and Tabor. Then we get involved. And at this point, we look at the budget. We've had ample opportunity to request revisions in the budget. In fact, we've done some of that. And we also have an opportunity to give a look at that point and say, hey, maybe I want to make some adjustments in our policy or objectives. And then we have a responsibility, again, to look at that budget from an alignment with what our needs, what our objectives, from a community level, top level, 50,000 foot level, but not to look at it from a day-to-day implementation standpoint. And that's, again, as Sam talked about, that's the manager's job. We had the public hearing. Unfortunately, I don't think we had anyone speak at the public hearing on the budget. But it gives us an opportunity at that time to hear what our constituents have to say about it. Hear what the rest of the community, whether they may not be a constituent. They may be a business owner in town. They may be a second homeowner. They may be a full-time resident. What they think about that budget and the priorities and the implementation of the priorities that we've set forward. And then we go through the adoption process, which we're into tonight, and we'll be adopting a budget via the resolution, and we'll also be adopting the spending authority for next year. And then we get into implementation. At that point, our role shifts. We then are an oversight role. The staff gives us information on what's going on. They give us visibility from not only a financial standpoint, but of how we're progressing. And the staff recommends adjustments to us also through supplemental appropriations and amendments. Go to the next slide. And this is kind of really a summary, a little bit of the town manager's role. He leads the prep of that budget, and he's responsible for implementing that budget. Town manager is the one who works with the staff, and the manager is responsible to give us the insights that we need to be able to judge of how that is being implemented. Next slide. One of the things we went through in September, October is using the budget to evaluate the town manager. And at that point, what we're really doing is evaluating his process leadership, the coordination, timeliness, the alignment of the staff, alignment of implementation of that budget with our goals and priorities, of the accuracy of the financial accuracy of revenue, expenditure control, and then the operational execution. Is the execution of that budget to deliver the promised results that we intended as we started the year, and the town manager frankly committed to give to us. And then communication, and that's probably the key point here is we have to be working very closely with the manager. Manager has to be working very closely with us to give us the feeling all the way along and the public of that we're meeting the overall objectives. Now, as council members, we also, as Sam talked about, have representation beyond our monthly meetings. And I think the council's done a pretty good job involved with engagement with the public, hearing inputs from from our constituents, bringing those back in our reports to council. And as we've gone through that, I think we've also been good as well as we're representing, make sure everyone knows we're representing the town's interests, the collective council, not our individual piece. And the big bugaboo is everyone wants us to commit. They want us to say, yep, I'm going to go do this. I think one example may be the request we had from a community member to say, hey, we want a bus stop down at West Hills as a prime example.
However, we brought it to the council and had a discussion.
That's right. We
Made a decision to.
We had council that was taken through the proper channels, and it was the goal is going to be achieved next year, and that was done properly. But we need to make sure that when that community member brought that up, that we didn't say an individual in the council didn't go out and say, yeah, we're going to go do that. I don't have that authority. You don't have that authority. We have the authority. And that again goes back to some of the things that Sam had to say earlier this evening. And we do need, as we're out working with the public, and it's amazing when you look at our council meetings, the amount of time that we spent in the council meetings on reports back to council. And I think that's very positive. Probably on a whole, we spend more than half of our council meetings on those reports. When you look at the time. And that also gives the public an idea of what's going on as well, allows council members to engage. We also have council members who are on committees that we have established supporting the council. You know, the role of that committee member is to encourage all voices on those committees to be heard, to be a listening voice, a learning voice, not to push their own agendas, and to speak again for the council, not their individual priorities. And that was John's presentation. Any questions on that?
Yes.
I mean, Dan's. Let's go to the next one, the planning one. I found this interesting, and let's go to the next slide. I found this interesting when I took a look at the budget and mapped out, put the budget items in a couple of buckets of where we're spending our money. And there's a little pie chart over here on the right, and just walking through that, general services and staff, the lion's share, public safety, lion's share, maintenance of roads and bridges, of town hall purchase snuck in there, US 6 safety. Now we're talking about planning for the future of establishing a housing program. Remarkably was high in that list as well. Community engagement's also in there, but that was also predominantly driven by the nicotine tax dollars of $170,000 of that's on the nicotine tax. And then there's a couple of other items that fill into that. Trails and open space is in there as well. You know, culminating again, looking to the future on on the master plan, which allows us to start looking out in the 5-10 year point where we're going to be going. But also there's some items in there as well, which were the result of listening to the community during some of the community sessions that we had, whether it be the RTAP process or the comprehensive master plan process, as we're looking at where wayfinding and signage of the infrastructure, capital infrastructure maintenance, and then annual trail maintenance as well. Economic development, and then completing the strategic plan. Again, that's both of those are more looking out beyond the next year, but setting the stage for future. Then you turn to staff actions, council staff actions. And this gets back where we're directly involved on a more day-to-day basis. And I want to emphasize, this is not complete. This was just what hit me on the top of my head as I went through the list. There's a whole group of other areas, I think, Carol brought up recently that we needed to look at how we were going to handle the charitable contributions and putting a structure to that. But we need, as a council, to be able to prioritize these. And then John needs to be able to tell us what's achievable given the staff and the budget that he has as we're going forward in the future. But these are items that we really, as we go to the next slide, we really need to look at. We need to get to the goals and strategic objectives for the next year to help give guidance to John, to give guidance to ourselves, to help police a little bit of what we want to do, because we are resource limited. We're resource limited from a budget standpoint. We're resource limited from a staff standpoint. And the other piece very often we don't think about is we're resource limited from our time. We have 2 meetings a month. And so that's a limitation. And so my recommendation to council and Dan's as well is we need to have a offsite or a planning session sometime in January to focus for next year. And the sooner we have that in the beginning of the year, this is deferring to later in the year, means that we don't have good guidance for the town manager. And so, again, I would like to see, what are your thoughts on that? And whether you're willing to support putting something together in January. And we'd bring in an outside, facilitator, probably not the one we had last time, but someone who experienced, perhaps Policy Center. They do that all the time for governments. So what are your thoughts?
I agree. I think definitely the sooner the better. Because I think we have a lot, and I think we did accomplish some things at the last one, but I think we kind of walked away not in a concrete, hey, here's where we're headed. We talked about some important topics, but I think given now that the town is up and running and some things have been accomplished, I think it's important to have a sharper focus on where that vision leads us down the road.
Other thoughts?
So I agree 100%.
Yeah.
Because I think if we don't have a vision of where we're headed, then all these other things are just random. I would bring in about the comprehensive plan and how we would like to tie that into the strategic plan. Kind of chicken or the egg.
I think there's two things. One piece is, where do we want to go additionally in the near term?
Right.
Because we're kind of in a transition period. Last year was get the basics for a town stood up.
Right.
This year is starting to focus on the future, and the actual strategic plan is where you're going to get that long-term view. And so I would see this year is where do we want our emphasis to be in the next year or two as we're developing those things? And that comprehensive plan is a very important input into the strategic plan.
Correct. And that's kind of what I was getting at, because the comprehensive plan has a lot of good feedback
Yeah.
from the community and helps us form that strategic
Yeah.
plan. So trying to figure out the timing of that and how that,
Right now, the comp plan, from what I understand from talking to Lindsay, is probably, we're going to be in the approval piece of that probably in February. We're delayed a little bit. We would have gotten into it first week of January, started into that. But right now, given that we've committed to take the STR issue in Loveland Pass Village, and that's going to take up pretty much, I would anticipate that'll take up pretty much a full work session. So we're looking at really that second meeting in January to get back into the comp plan. John will have to reassess whether he thinks we can get part of that comp plan piece into that first meeting, but I'm not sure what the time's going to be for how much time it's going to be, because there could be some significant public comment in that. So, but really, I think what John's looking for in this is some near-term guidance that he can give the staff on the direction and the priorities that they need to be focusing on that's in line with what all the council wants. And then with that master plan to be completed by the end of the year, then you start having that 10 to 15 year look. That makes sense? I know it doesn't give you would like to have that master plan. I mean,
well,
plan.
yeah, well, I think the data and the information that is coming out of that comprehensive plan, right? The feedback from the constituents and, you know, what the citizens have said
Well, we've got
as we build that.
we've got a lot of that feedback from the RTAP group of studies. We got a lot of the feedback. You've seen a lot of the feedback from even the preliminary stuff in the comp plan. We just don't have the final document, which is it's going through a process. I think there's another session it has to have with the planning commission before it comes to us. Yes. Other thoughts, Carol?
I like your assessment of where we are, what we've done and where we're going. Last year was a lot of building blocks.
Yep.
This year, I would also note that we did a lot of research, evidence, fact-finding, and community, and a lot of community engagement. So I think that puts us as a council in a better position this year than last year. There were some positive elements of last year's offsite, or whatever we're calling it. But I would look for more structure. I like this briefing itself as a starting point. If nothing else, we need to have a very specific, this is the purpose of the offsite. These are the outcomes we're looking for.
Yeah, and
Not yet the strategic plan, but prioritization. I think it's within our bailiwick now. There is one other consideration. Last year, I think we wanted to do this earlier. I think we did in April, right?
yeah.
Wasn't it? I think it started with an early February, and people had some legitimate reasons why some of the in-between dates were not going to work. So I would urge that John start reaching out to us to.
Well, I was going to ask.
Let me just finish the point, because if we start getting pushback about not available, we might have to be open-minded and say we could do it a long evening session,
Yeah.
2 evening sessions, a weekend session. I say that so that we
No.
don't let that drift again this year.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you.
And I think what I wanted to get tonight was, one, do we want to do, would we like to do the planning session sooner rather than later, January-ish? And then the second piece is a task to the manager and staff to go out and come up with availability of dates so that we could then, for council members, so that we could then he could start the planning process.
Yeah, is that reasonable to get that started before the calendar year ends, do you think?
Oh, I don't think there's any.
If I talk to him.
I'll ask the manager. I don't want to speak for the
Okay, he's
manager.
here.
The manager's here. What do you think, John?
I think that we will, actually, what would be good is if we could get types of days that generally work better. So Wednesdays, Fridays, just let me know that, and then we can send out some Google, whatever type of polls and find out when people could make it. But I don't want to just send out 2 months worth of dates and say, pick a date. So if we can get just even a little bit of feedback on, what days in the week would work best.
Okay.
That's legit.
That's
When do you want
what do you
that
want?
back?
Well, why don't we go around the table now?
Okay.
And
Yeah.
because I think that's what John was asking. And why don't I look at, I'll start with you, Carol, and
Hold on.
we'll come around.
I'll pull this up. Probably the only no-go date is the 12th. Pretty open.
Yeah, I mean, is there any particular day of the week versus date that is a no-go for anybody? Would you, I think Carol mentioned, would you rather do it in an evening session versus a day session? A weekend session versus a weekday session?
How long is it going to take again?
Probably at least half a day.
Let's say 5 hours is a
Yeah.
planned figure.
Yeah, I think what we saw with the,
I don't think, how different is this going to be from the one we did last year?
tremendously different.
Because I did not think that last year's was a good use of my time.
Yeah, this is a strategic, last year's was not designed as a strategic planning session. That wasn't at least that wasn't my intent going in.
And to be fair, I think that was part of our concern, that this didn't feel like it was meeting our objectives because we didn't all understand the objectives. It was more of a group development.
Yeah, what happened?
Or cooperation.
What happened, frankly, is the facilitator didn't take our guidance of what we were looking for. So he pitched it more as a strategic thing, which it really wasn't.
Okay, so if we can be more purposeful
Yeah.
and with some specific outcomes.
The outcomes is goals and objectives.
Right, so Erin, if you could trust that that could be possible, what would be a 5-hour time period? I think you have the least amount of flexibility in your schedule. I might be wrong.
And then John probably also has a fairly
Yeah.
limited schedule. And it's very difficult for me to say like, oh, this day of the week works for me. It's more of like a particular day that is proposed could work.
I think we'd be open if you would propose a date, if that's possible. I know we're putting you on the spot. We can,
I have multiple calendars I must consult.
And I would recommend it happen towards the end of January versus the
Okay,
beginning.
that's useful.
Because we need to be able to get the facilitator lined up and that.
I propose Wednesday, January 21st. I will look for other options while you all check on that.
I'm okay with that. I mean, are you thinking, since we're allocating 4 or 5 hours, is this a morning, an afternoon, a late afternoon, early
What works
evening,
better for you?
Afternoon?
late afternoon, or
Early, start maybe 1 o'clock
1 to 5, or
Yeah, that sounds great.
something like that, or,
Yeah.
or 1 to 6.
yeah,
You give them 5 hours.
right. No, that works for me. I can make that work.
Good. That's my birthday. I celebrate with some strategic planning. Yeah, exactly.
And that gives staff an additional task. I saw Maddie smile a little bit when that happened, recognizing it even before we did. John, what do you think? Ron?
Sorry, I already put it in my calendar for that. That'll work just fine. We can make this work.
All right.
So make that tentative and just check.
Tentative on.
Bagging out.
Yeah, I'm texting him right now to ask what his
Yeah.
schedule looks like
Yeah.
that day. I don't know if he is in the position to reply immediately.
All right.
Thank you.
We will go through with that with the tentative right now and see what John can do, what's available for John. Do you have the guidance you need, Mr. Town Manager?
I sure do. Thank you very much.
Oh, by the way, I've talked to the Keystone Center and they think they might be able to support. So I've had initial conversation with Sue. Unless you have someone else in mind.
No, I think that would be great. I'll coordinate with Sue as soon as I get back and get someone.
Super. Now, we think you really ought to start tonight and tomorrow morning, and probably it shouldn't take more than a week of planning on your part, of full-time work.
Yeah.
Comment is a good comment right now.
Well, noticeably, that is an off week for town council meetings. So.
Yes, yeah, it's,
Yeah, we were giving you credit for all that planning,
all right.
but I think
We look at so many
it may
calendars
give
at
John
once.
enough time. If he has to.
That's my hope,
All right.
and if not, we'll flex.
Anything else on that topic right now?
No, thanks for bringing that up.
All right. The next item is, and the last item for the work session for the year is discussion of financials. If that'll turn it over to Heike and John remotely.
And we'll let Heike take this one.
All right, good evening, Town Council. Heike Fox, Finance Director. So in the packet, you have the financials on the October financials with the September revenue sales tax. Just give me some guidance if you would prefer that I walk through those with you, or if you just want me to open it up for questions that you might have.
Carol?
Unless somebody else wants the blow by blow, I would like to know, what are you concerned about? And what will you be closely monitoring over the next, especially over our high season?
So it's an excellent question. So the concern naturally is our revenue is primarily based on sales tax, as you all are aware. Right now, through September year to date, we're trending 3% above the same period last year. We're right on schedule for our budget, which that part is comforting. What's not comforting is the September sales tax came in 15% lower than last year. And then I just got October's, and October's is top of my head, don't hold me to it, but I want to say is 12% lower than last year in October. So, I mean, we're definitely getting a hit. With that being said, if our sales tax numbers are going to be lower, it's good that they're in September and October. November, when we get November's, and we'll definitely look at closely at November's and December to see what how they're trending and how all the businesses are doing. And with, as you all know, with the 2026 budget, we budgeted flat. And basically our buffer there is with the new hotel, the Kindred Hotel, opening up just to kind of, with their sales. We'll see how that goes, but we will definitely be monitoring those closely, and if adjustments need to be made, and then we can make that. As far as the 2025 budget, the supplemental budget that you guys have in the packet for the evening, we'll be fine there. The appropriations for that, for the expenditures, we will definitely go under that for this year. In the 26 budget, if we need to pivot, we have room to pivot. But financially right now for our small town and what we have going, we're really actually looking pretty good. With that being said, as the mayor talked about, once the council establishes, more priorities and like a CIP plan going forward, even though we look good right now, we have about 3 million in our reserves, but that could be quickly spent on a big project. And with not knowing how grants will be coming in, I mean, those are just things that we'll all have to look at, but.
Follow on.
Mm-hmm.
Not pinning you, not going to write this down, but at what point do you think we need to take a hard look at adjusting the budget? Should weather, environment, and what am I saying?
Snow.
Business. What am I trying to say? If the tourism goes down, if snow doesn't appear, if international tourism stays off, do we need to take a hard look at this in January? Wait through the snow season and then see.
I mean, we can have those conversations at each month when the financials are done. The hard part is, sales tax revenues are 2 months behind. So once we get January sales tax revenues, it's going to be March. But we'll know I honestly believe that December and January, once we look at those will give us a good, and those are, as you all know, that first quarter those are big months. So if we don't make it, or if they're really under during that period, we'll take a serious look at what our budget holds.
Thank you.
Yeah, and there's things, like I said, there's things in the budget that's, and you're all aware of those, of what the priorities are or can be put off.
Sure.
And I would think that probably in early February, you'll have the first input of the January sales tax, and in the first part of January, not sales tax, lodging tax.
Lodging tax, yes.
And the lodging tax is probably a pretty
It's a
good,
good indicator for sure.
pretty good front end indicator of where things going. If our lodging's really down in December, then You
That's-
probably have
And
a,
we started
It's a-
having those
Is
Yeah,
conversations.
it'll be a true tell because everything's going to be, or not everything, but a majority of the sales tax, of course, is generated from the lodging.
yeah,
Thank you.
all right. Other questions? Any, we're again back down to the question, would anyone like to have Heike go through the presentation, or you're happy with just the way, as we've talked about it? Any concerns?
Just a kind of a question. Because this seems like this could be very variable, right? Depending on what the lodging tax and sales tax. Are there any models out there that we can use? Is there any way to get any better predictability other than, well, let's kind of see how we did? And I don't know if there is. I'm just questioning is that.
No, I mean, that's a great question. And, I mean, if you guys have input on that, that would be great. The one thing that comes up to my mind is just, asking the local businesses. They'll be able to tell you, like, if you knock on their door or like stop in there, just like how revenues are doing. I think that's the best way.
Another indicator is bookings,
Yeah.
getting booking data. And I don't know, I'll ask the clerk the question of, do we have access now? And you as well on the marketing side.
Yeah, I can't tell you about current though.
But-
It's a little delayed, yeah.
Yeah, but it's, I know there's state info that's available on how bookings are progressing and that sort of thing. That's the type of a function a DMO would provide for us.
Yeah, what I've heard so far is simply a big concern about international travel.
Yeah.
But it's not, doesn't have a number on it.
Yeah, and frankly, international travel doesn't make a huge impact, hasn't made a huge impact on Keystone. It may pick up with Kindred, and that's a big unknown we have. Kindred's just going to hopefully have opened just before Christmas in a couple of weeks, and we don't have any feel really of bookings or popularity in Kindred. So that's.
Or it could even just be a shift of
Yeah.
other
Well,
local places.
but
not necessarily an
but it's
influx.
probably a different demographic.
Yeah, sure.
Because, in fact, Kindred, even what we saw in the destination blueprint session that we had, it was interesting that the most communities in Colorado are seeing the drop off in the mountain communities, except those that are dealing with luxury facilities and those that are use heavy international travel. Those like Aspen and I think Vail are doing very well. And now we're in a position, we're split. Although the big piece, whether we want to admit it or not, our big piece is Front Range.
Okay.
Maddie,
We'll watch for that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Maddie, if you could get any, just over the next month, see if you can get any feel for the bookings, because I think that's going to be a good push for us.
Check with our contacts as well.
Yeah. And you might be able to get a feel for that.
Yeah.
Well, they have it by
Yeah.
resources, so. And I think you have, unless we're getting rid of it with the website, with the hotline work, that contractor also had booking data.
Yes, and we still have access to that, at least for the next few months.
Yeah, so if you could tap into that for us as well.
Yes.
And I think that'd probably be very helpful for hiking.
Good. That would be, yeah. If we have those resources at our fingertips, that would be exceptional.
Right? Anything, any other items? Oh, in that case, Carol,
Hold on a sec. I had some notes that were related to the budget, which you actually included either.
John says he can do the 21st.
Good. John, we have the 21st locked in.
Yep, I heard that.
Ooh, that's scary.
Isn't he supposed to hear it?
No. It was,
Just was for that.
Oh,
that tells us how sensitive these mics are.
absolutely, yeah. Heike,
Yeah.
I see a jump in medical, dental, vision insurance. Can you just give us a little insight about that?
From the
This
the
year?
approved budget for
Yeah,
25.
difference between the approved. and
Yeah,
supplemental.
and that is basically the insurance rates went up, plus I was not budgeted in the insurance.
Oh, that's valid. But even under public safety, I saw a pretty good jump. That's what made me look back at it in the first place. So everybody's insurance, health insurance went up.
It did, and then for 26, it's going up. We are in a small pool, and so it's based on how much people use the insurance is how it's based. But generally, with CIRSA, with the health insurance, we don't have big jumps, just, of course, lately we have between this year and next year. But hopefully it'll start to taper off and go back to normal, but.
And when you say small pool, what are you referring to?
So we have a small pool, health insurance. So basically, our rates are based on how much everybody in our pool, so it's small employer pools, use the insurance. So if it's not used a whole lot, then our rates go down. If it's used a whole bunch, then our rates go up. It's actually in reality, our rates are actually better than like a bigger municipality.
Okay, so more easily influenced, and yet you're saying it's still the right way to go? Okay, thank you.
The questions? In that case, we have successfully gone 1 minute,
Wow.
We could fill that minute, but let's not.
1 minute to 6. In that case of the work session is adjourned. We'll come back again at 7 o'clock for the council meeting.